Now, Simon Clayton spent 3 years in bitter court battles with his ex-wife over custody of their daughter, Esty. At one stage, she even resorted to abducting her, later spending time in prison for his actions.
And despite all the acrimony, Simon and his ex-wife finally agreed to share equal custody of their daughter. She is now 7 and spends 1 week with Simon and 1 week with her mum. Now, normally, custody agreements would not be allowed to be discussed so publicly, but yesterday, in a landmark case, that ruling was lifted. And Simon is here now, along with Sophia Cannon, an expert in family law and a barrister. Welcome, both of you. Simon, you were saying, Sophia, that this is absolutely revolutionary, that we can talk openly about the result of a custody case.
Indeed. The issue about this case and why it is such a revolution is that previously, automatically, you could not discuss family law judgments until the child turned 18. So at least you had almost 20 years if you were talking about a baby. And in this case, it would have been another 10 years before Simon could have spoken openly about the issues in the case.
That's across the board, and that's a blanket ruling, or it was?
It was a blanket ruling, yes.
So the important fact for you, Simon, to be able to discuss exactly how you've reached this custody agreement with your daughter is vitally important because, for you personally...
Well, for me personally, we're proud of it actually, but also I am in touch with many other men who are in and out of the family courts, and the judge who presided over us reaching the agreement a year ago, I'll just make one slight correction to your intro there, we actually had shared care for most of the last 6 years, and it was just a case of getting a lot of things sorted out finally, and there were... issues sort of arose. The family courts do have a habit of throwing petrol on the situation, I'm afraid. But anyway, why it's so important is the High Court judge that presided over us reaching the settlement, which was a written settlement in a completely new way, he even said that it should be commended to other parents to use it as a template, yet because of these archaic secrecy rules, I couldn't even do that. And I know lots of people who are already benefiting from this written agreement that we made, that I have here, because they can take it into court and use it. And that means so much to me, because all that I've been through is worthwhile, and I know my daughter finds it worthwhile. She is proud that we've been able to help people.
Well, it's all that the family as a whole has been through, I'm quite sure. I mean, your ex-wife has said that she's absolutely for this shared parenting. It's working, and she's happy to, but she doesn't want to be here today. So, tell us about the shared parenting, how it came about. You went through endless battles, you took your daughter at one stage, you were in prison because you abducted her, you've paid the penalty for all of that, and finally you were given an opportunity to write some kind of parenting plan together. Did you have somebody, a mediator between you?
Well, you know, if we've got a minute to just go through it, because it is quite important. You know, the reality of the family courts, I'm afraid, is that most parents get buried forever under tons of paperwork. It becomes impossible. Many fathers particularly drop out. I deal with many men who are suffering from depression and stress. They just can't take it anymore. Because of there was an incident 3 years ago, I was arrested. We received publicity because Fathers for Justice got on my case. Having received publicity for that, the court system took our case a lot more seriously and prioritised us, spent more time. Nevertheless, it still took far too long. I mean, I'd hate to have been not prioritised, and then at the end, and it really has to be said, although I'm incredibly grateful for it, it was only because it had been a notorious and public case. A fabulous barrister from London, Anthony Kirk QC, came in. He was brought in effect, we don't know quite the story, there's some little bit of magic sprinkled, and crucially, having ironed out all the issues over several years, court reports, court hearings, which we can't really go into, but there were never really many issues, what he did is, we were given the privilege that very few parents have. He said, we've got time now. We're going to have to spend a lot of time on this case. It's the big failing in the family court system. It doesn't give the parents enough time to iron out their problems. We spent 2 days in the High Courts, holed up in a little room, thinking of what's the perfect solution. Let's start from the beginning. How are we going to word this perfectly so everybody feels great about it. And crucially, he said to the High Court judge, we're not going to use these dehumanising terms that the courts love, contact and residence. We're going to talk about how love may be expressed and spending time in each other's company, and we drew it up in an agreement which is a public, it was always a public, this piece of paper is a public document, but it had to have the names removed.
How does it work?
As I said, we've always pretty much had shared care, but it formalises a little bit more. We find what it does, first of all, it deals with the principle that there will be equality. That principle is now established between myself and Mum. So we arrange our lives around that principle, and I can tell you, although the family courts hate it, once that's done, once you've dealt with that, there's nothing to fight about anymore. And thus, in practice, you usually do it alternate weeks. One parent will pick up from school on a Thursday or Friday, and the other parent picks up the following.
So logistically, you're geographically quite close.
Yeah, this will only work with a school-age child once the child, when you're living within half an hour of the school, maybe 45 minutes, which we both do. But there are no problems.
Now, I want to know that there are no problems between now you and your ex-wife, other than whatever the history is. But for your daughter, any child in any family court, the child is the supreme person. And it's what matters to the child. So she is happy with living 1 week with you, 1 week with her mum, and sharing her time that way.
I mean, she's pretty much been used to it. I mean, that's in a way that in our cases they didn't really highlight that. I mean, the Kafkas who deal with the family courts hate the idea. A Kafkas officer said to me 2 years ago he doesn't believe in shared care.
Who's Kafkas?
Kafkas are the reporters of the court. They effectively write the reports and decide the case. They interview the parents. But just to get to your question, how does it work? I mean, if a child, it's not necessarily the best way of putting it, but a child can see that they need as much of a relationship with each parent as possible, and if a child gets used to an arrangement, it just works. And in actual fact, my daughter always says, well, she gets 2 Christmases, she gets 2 birthdays, she gets a Christmas at both Christmas, now she's got 2 bedrooms. And do you know what? I know quite a lot about scientific research, I read a lot of science. I think it actually may even be better for her in a way of help. She has, her environment is bigger. She has two houses, 2 gardens to explore, 2 houses.
But what she doesn't have is a warring faction.
Absolutely, that is the critical thing.
Growing up with 2 happy parents.
Sophia, you were saying at the beginning there, you touched upon how important it is. So just explain this landmark decision and how important you think this is going to be to families up and down the country.
Firstly, this was so revolutionary, this case, that the president of the family division wanted to state to everyone, and I think publicly he said, for the courts and for the judges and for the lay magistrates that have to deal with these cases, it's very difficult for them to deliver justice in secret, behind closed doors, and for parents like Simon to say, well, what is going on? And what he decided and what he put forward yesterday was that everybody needs to look at the family justice system, and that the judgment and what is decided, once a case has finished, it can be reported. However, once it is reported, there has to be an idea that the parents aren't going to do something silly with it. I think in the judgment he refers to that the parents have to be responsible and exercise their judgment about what they're going to do with this judgment. But for these parents and for these children, they can now discuss what has happened in court, look at the judgment, exercise the responsibility, and of course provide these children with certainty, with stability, and with a framework on how they're going to deal with their lives. But what was so upsetting, I think, for many parents is that they couldn't discuss the judgment. And when there was a positive outcome in this case, it couldn't be discussed and it couldn't be shared. And it is a landmark case, because up and down the country there are going to be new guidelines given to every judge, every magistrate's court, about how you are to deal with these judgments, and equally, when are they going to be discussed and how and in what venue?
It's under the magnifying glass, isn't it, the family justice system now? It's more and more and more. We're discussing it here. It seems to be the spotlight's pointing in that particular corner.
That's right. as you will no doubt know, last year there was a major inroad in that parents could finally show their court papers, whether they're involved in private proceedings, such as Simon was, against his ex-wife, or even when they're involved in care proceedings. That is when they have a social work involvement in their case. They can now show those papers to a grandparent, to a minister of a church, or to somebody responsible. That was the first inroad, and that came from this sofa, and that's been fantastic for us.
Wow, well that was when we met just a few months ago, so I'm glad that it's wonderful, isn't it, to think that somehow we lit a little spark and something came
Indeed.
out. Thank you, Severe, we've got to end there, and thank you very much indeed, Simon, and let's hope that parents everywhere can find a way not to have to get to the point of family court, try and talk about it, sort it out before.